I'll let you know when I see us. Whoops.
Hold up one second. Put the damn camera away.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's Sarithkin from Montier, and I'm here for the Murder of Dukes interview with actually my 50th Duke. So this is special because I have now reached my goal, although I'm going to keep going. And it's Duke Timothy of Arindale, who runs one of the most fabulous events ever in Adult Swim. So I think he's fantastic. And I'm so glad that you agreed to do this. Thank you so much. So usually we start these with what I call your SCA origin story, like where you found the SCA and when, and that kind of stuff. So if you could start there, that would be great.
That'd be fine. I discovered the SCA when I was 15 in northern Atlanta, what had just become the Kingdom of Atlantia. It was the perfect thing for a 15-year-old kid who played D&D. Pretty much, everybody in the SCA started D&D. It seems that way. But a friend invites me to a new D&D group, and I'm like, hey, okay, great. Let's go. And we show up in the parking lot, and I see people in really god awful armor because it was 1982, and I fell in love. And here, almost 40 years later, I'm still doing it. I've traveled throughout the known world. I've had the opportunity to live in 4 kingdoms for substantial amounts of time. I started fighting and was knighted in Atlantia. Shortly after I got knighted, I moved to Caid for a few years. Was fortunate enough to win my first crown there. After almost 4 years, I moved to the east, lived there for 10 or 12 years. Now I've been in Ethelmark for 10 years. And I'm hoping that I don't have any opportunities to move again. But the SCA really has been the perfect thing for me. Gave me a direction in life. All the people I've been around in my formative years in the SCA were phenomenal role models. And they took a confused 15-year-old teenager and taught him right from wrong and taught me how to be a better person, taught me how to give back. And here I am, mid 50s, and I'm trying to repay the favors that were always done for me when I grew up. I didn't have a driver's license my first 3 or 4 years in the SCA, and anytime I wanted to go to a practice or an event, it was on the kindness of others. And like I said, here I am trying to repay those kindnesses to other people almost 40 years later.
That's super cool. So when you started in the 80s, was there not an age limit for fighting? Could you already fight?
There was not. Heck, I fought my first Pennsic field battle at 16. It used to be legal. My first Pennsic, one of the locals actually did the paperwork, and he was able to take temporary guardianship and took a 16-year-old kid to Pennsic. He wasn't my parents. That was kosher back then.
Right.
And they changed the rule shortly thereafter, but this is the first time I haven't been in Cooper's Lake since I was 16 at some point during the summer.
Wow.
It's kind of strange. It's sometimes I was only there very, very briefly, but yeah, I have not missed one since Pennsic 12.
Wow. That's incredible. So you've really seen how Pennsic has changed over the years.
Yeah, my first Pennsic, we showed at that point, the field battle was always Friday, the woods battle was always Saturday, and the bridge battle was always Sunday. We showed up on Wednesday of War Week and drove. There was no land grab. You drove around and found a place to park your tent. I ended up that first year on the lower edges of Horde Hill. But that was 83. Now I'm camped in Never Never Land. Been bumped about 37 times for one reason or another. Well, we want to give each kingdom their forever site. Hey, that's cool. We'll you can bump us. We'll go park somewhere else. And then it was, hey, we want to add handicap parking. Hey, that's great. We can, we'll do it again. But once again, they put us in a we'll never bump you again spot. So hopefully we'll get more than 2 or 3 years out of that.
It'll stick this time.
Yep.
So let's talk about your early days in the SCA in Atlanta. Who were some of your mentors back then and to teach you how to fight?
For about the first 2 years, it was kind of the blind leading the blind. First year and a half anyway. But then one of the guys who was responsible for most of my rides, now Count Stefan of Wolfshaven, he was a sailor at Fort Meade, where NSA is stationed. He started taking us down to the Storvik fighter practice in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And that dynamic is something I have never seen in all these years in the SCA. And it was something I dearly wish existed nowadays in the SCA. That fighter practice, again, in 1983, 1984, typically had 60 fighters at it. Probably a dozen or so members of the chivalry every week. And they, whether you were a squire or not, they kind of treated us all as a communal pool of squires. Anybody worked with anyone, but the dynamic was amazing. And it really lifted us all up at an amazing level. Those people, Sir Strykar, Sir Narlik, Sir Torvald, Sir Beauchamp-Paul, Sir Volodya, they really built the foundation for the person I ended up being, Sir Stanford, Sir Stefan. There was no secret techniques. There were no private practices. It was, how can we help each other? And this practice, we'd end up singles combat for the first hour and a half, melees for the last half hour or so. And I've lived in some pretty densely populated areas, and there's never been anything like that. Even when you get to a phenomenal practice like Nutley, which is still just an amazing practice, it didn't have the same vibe. I mean, we really pushed each other. That was the start of what built the guys I came up with. There were about 8 or 10 of us hotshot unbelts when I was coming up, and we pushed each other because I knew that if I missed a practice, the tourney I'd go at that weekend, Kuhn would beat me, or Kane would beat me, or Malcolm, or Stefan, or Thorbrand. When you'd miss a practice, those guys wouldn't. And so we force of will pushed each other harder. And I look back at the guys I came up with now, but collectively we probably have 25 or 30 crown victories between us.
Wow.
And it was just, darn it, if I slack off, I'm going to lose. They're going to beat me. From a fighting perspective, it was quite the dynamic. And then all those people, again, Stanford, Strykar, Stefan, they took the off the field aspect and they shaped me into the person who's been trying to contribute to the SCA all these years. Oh, and my first night, Sir Stanford, his lady would always have us on Tuesday nights at fighter practice. If you didn't do the dance practice, you would not fight.
Oh.
So on the Tuesday night fight practice, I learned all the medieval dances, and they have served me well. All the reigns, all the events I've been to. When it's time for dancing at the events, I still know all the dance steps. learned the hole in the wall 35 years ago, learned the horses brawl 35 years ago. And, that's the handy thing about medieval dances. They don't really change much.
And it's fun if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, and like anything else, it's not as fun. So,
well, I don't care how many crowns I win. Them calling me graceful, grace is only a courtesy. I have 2 club feet when it comes to dancing.
funny. That's funny. So you said that you had more than one night?
Yes.
Okay, so can you tell the story of that if you don't mind?
I was in my late teens, late teens. All I really wanted to do was please people, and I really got myself in a really bad situation. And my first night, Sir Stanford, who I adore, he and I agreed that it was best that we end the knight squire relationship in order for me to grow. It really was a very, very good thing. At the time, I was too immature and felt put upon to realize just how many people were reaching out their hand, trying to help me get my shit together, if you'll pardon my language.
That's fine.
But and Duke Ronald, yeah, Ronald was one of those first and foremost stretching out his hand to help me from being such a bonehead. But Sir Narlik was the one who really made it clear that he was there to help me. Again, in hindsight, they all were, but I just didn't realize it. And Narlik and I squired. I think he only did it because I kept. One of the big events in Atlantia was the Ice Castle 3-man melee tournament, and for his household, I was a 1-man wrecking crew at that event for several years, and I think he squired me just so I'd be on his team and couldn't beat him.
It's funny.
But the thing is, excuse me, I have a lot of patience for people who screw up, because here it's kind of presumptuous to say this, but I'm kind of an elder statesman, and people look at me like Tim does a lot of good things for the SCA, but I mean there was a time period of quite a span of years where my name was mud, and if it wasn't for people reaching out their hand to help me out and people giving me a second chance, I would have dropped out of the SCA, when I was 19. So I try and give that same courtesy to other people. I mean, and so I'm a little more tolerant of some people than others might be.
Well, I think that's a good thing. Everybody should be given the room to grow and to change, right? I mean, none of us are the same people we were in our early 20s.
No. One of my daughters brought home the guy that I was when I was 19 to meet their mother, and I, they'd never find his body. Centralia is in my home shire. We could dispose of it easily.
That's funny. So did the guy that you did D&D with, did he stay in with you?
For a couple of years, but he and his brother both managed to get hurt in the early days, and their parents kind of put the kibosh on it when both of them had a broken arm.
Yeah.
I mean, the armor was so bad back then. They had only just made Freon tanks illegal when I joined, and there were still a couple floating around for loaner use. I mean, my first body armor that I got to use at that loaner practice was actually a milk crate that someone had cut the bottom out of, and they heated it up with a propane torch, so it was vaguely an oval. They cut it into a front and a back and put 4-inch upholstery padding in it, and we laced it up the sides, and we had this hideous powder blue tunic that we threw over top of it to kind of hide its mundanity. I mean, the armor was just god awful.
Wow.
The first helmet I actually owned was a god awful, ugly barrel helmet made out of the hood of a car. I mean, armor has come a long way since then.
Definitely, definitely. So you talked a bit about the Storvik practice and having a group of guys pushing each other. So when you were really working hard toward knighthood, I'm guessing that was the goal. What other kinds of things did you do to make yourself the best fighter you could be?
Me, it was just again, all of us unbelts, we pushed each other, and that was enough. Well, yeah, I mean, the SCA was a different time then, and in some ways it was a lot more innocent. We were all 20 something, all of us.
Right.
So it was easy for us to say, there's a tournament, 10 hours away. We can, it's 11:30 at night. We could make it there by time to armor up. I grew up in Atlantia. I was in Maryland. At the time, Atlantia had a war with Trimaris, even though we didn't share a border. Meridies was in the way and still is, obviously. But we would do that as a weekend road trip. Because, again, we were in 20s. Almost no one had kids. It's easy enough to talk your buddies into, hey, you want to drive down to Jacksonville, Florida for a war this weekend? Yeah, I can go. I'll tell the girlfriend I'm driving down to Florida. And, we would rent a bus and alternate years, we would drive down to Jacksonville one year. And the next year, Trimaris would drive up to the southern part of Atlantia, somewhere in South Carolina. I think it was in Columbia. Been going back so far. But when everybody's 20 years old, they don't have kids, and they were either college students or had jobs rather than careers. And that's one of the things that I look at now that kind of frustrates me when I see how hard some of the areas make candidates for knighthood push themselves. It's I can't ask anybody to do what I did when I was 21 years old, when they have, a spouse, children, and real honest to God job responsibilities where, they have to be out of town. They have to, be at work at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning. It's different. And I personally think that, the SCA, we really miss something with that aspect being gone. There's nothing wrong with the organization now, but I was knighted when I was 23, and was nothing like being a 23-year-old knight walking around Penzic. Nothing like it. And at least in Ethelmark, our youngest knight is already over 30, well over. Sir Beatrix, I think I think she is still our youngest, and she's over 30. And when I joined, one of the things that we joked around was they had an order they called FOAM, the unofficial order of fat old Atlantean men, and if you were over 200 pounds and over 30, you could belong to this group, and you could trade. If you were, say, 250 pounds, you could trade that extra 50 pounds for 5 years, because almost no one was over 30.
Right.
And now, it's the rare exception when we see anybody at a practice under 30.
Right.
At least in my area.
And there is sort of a culture in the SCA where it feels like a lot of times the orders feel like if you're under 30, you're too young, which I don't know. Like it seems like if you're ready, you're ready. It shouldn't matter how old you are, but that is something that I think we wrestle with.
Yeah, yeah. I look back at our when the first Kingdom Seneschal I was really aware of was a college student at Virginia Tech. Um, how many? When was the last time a kingdom had a college sophomore or college junior as the Kingdom Seneschal? Uh, I would think it'd been quite a while. And nobody would dare put that kind of responsibility on somebody now. Um, Obviously, the SCA is a lot more complicated from a legal perspective now than it was back then. But still, it's. I think we're missing something in that extent.
Yeah. Well, when you got knighted in Atlantia, was it a surprise?
Again, I was kind of an irresponsible person, and I was still recouping from my transgressions when I was 19. And one of the local dukes came up to me the Tuesday before I was knighted at Penzic. This was still at the local fighter practice because Penzic was still mostly on the weekends, and said, His Majesty is going to be offering you a belt on Saturday. The polling, while valid, is a year old, and I think you'd do yourself a service by not accepting it because the poll's a year old, and we don't think you should have it. I don't think you should have it. Now he was one of the people I had in my irresponsibility I had transgressed against. I certainly bear him no ill will. But no, it was not a surprise for that.
Okay.
And then that weekend, Michael of Bedford offered me knighthood at Penzic.
But he couldn't knight you.
But yes, but Narlik at the time, Michael at the time was not a knight, so he had my knight, Sir Narlik, hold the sword.
Cool. That's cool. So you
gotta tell.
But anyway, sorry, my wife was trying to have me digress into anecdotes.
Anecdotes are good.
Anecdotes. Very, very funny. It was a battlefield knighting, and at the time, I assume it's still the same way. I wanted to get knighted at Penzic. I would have obviously taken it at any event, but you wanted to get knighted on the battlefield at Penzic. So at the time of the ceremony, I'm in armor, and armor at the time for me was pretty much a gambesson, spalders, knee cops, very, very light stuff. But Sir Narlik administers the accolade of knighthood with the sword, and of course slams it into my right shoulder, slams it into my left shoulder, then looks up at it, and it was Duke Michael's sword rather than the kingdom's sword of state. And he hit my shoulder so hard, and it was not the highest quality of steel, that he bent the knife blade at about probably a 30-degree angle. And there's a picture of Michael of Narlik looking at the blade like this, like, oops. Wow. And so he, dubs me, with this bent sword on my head, and then he picks the sword up afterwards and tries to straighten it, but puts a dog leg bend in the sword and kind of hands it back to the king. That, yeah, here's your sword. I've ruined it. So it was. I'm curious as if Michael was ever able to repair the sword, because it was a heck of a bend that Narlik put into it.
That is funny. So how did you feel about knighthood at that time? Like, was it, because it sounds like because you were young, you had, maybe some personality difficulties with some of the older people. Were you jaded at all, or?
I really didn't. I knew what it meant to be a knight, but I was looking at it more as a sense of personal achievement rather than a responsibility. And that's obviously, that's changed quite a bit. But at the time I needed to be a knight. That's how you show that you have made it as a a fighter. And yes, all of the non-fighting aspects were very, very important to me, and they still are. But I had to make it as a knight. I had to be recognized, and that my first reign when I was in Caid, it was the same. It was the same thing. I won crown. My first crown I won was, I need to be able to do this to prove myself.
Yeah.
And it was essentially, it was something I did for me, and which is the exact wrong motivation to have when you fight in a crown tournament. I fought for a young lady I was dating at the time, but it was my motivation was wrong, and so of course I did not serve the kingdom the way the kingdom deserved to be served.
So, fuck that.
But I made up for that in my next crown. 3 years later, I had started dating my now wife. I had moved to the East Kingdom. I won crown for her and proposed to her in the making her princess. I had the princess's coronet in my hands, and before I make you my princess and my queen, I would make you my wife. Will you marry me? And that's one of the frustrating things about the SCA in 1995 as opposed to the SCA in 2020. I proposed to my wife in front of 300 people, and a picture does not exist because flash photography was not allowed at events. Now, if that had happened at an event today, there would be 50 videos of it and several hundred photos. And I did not have the foresight to ask one of my friends, "Hey, I'm going to propose to Gabrielle. Do you think you could take a couple of pictures?" But except for that first reign, I have tried, and my wife with me, because it takes two to do the job properly. We've always tried to serve the kingdoms and her people. But as I said, that first reign in Caid, my motivation was not good.
Did you meet Gabrielle in the SCA?
Yes. At the time I met Gabrielle, I lived in Los Angeles. She lived in Washington, D.C., and we met at Estrella Wars.
Oh, cool.
I had just, my ex-wife and I had just separated. I made the mistake of getting married at 19. I was 19, and I was mature. I was mature for a good 13-year-old. Neither of us have any animosity towards the other one, but we were both too young to get married. So I had just separated from my ex-wife when I met Gabrielle. Somebody had introduced her to me at camp. And so I'm wandering around the old Estrella War site, which in the early 90s, the Estrella War site was this gargantuan circle where everybody camped around the perimeter of the circle, and the battlefield was in the center. And I'm just walking around the camp, and I see this girl sitting on a rock. I'm like, "Gabrielle, right? Why are you sitting out here in the middle of I got lost." And, I figured Mom always told me if I got lost, sit down and, somebody will come and find you. And, here we are, 29 years, 6 kids, 6 reigns.
Wow.
Later, worked out okay.
I guess so. That's really cool. I love how many people have met their spouses in the SCA. The SCA is such a great place for building community that way.
I mean, we all have friends that we would go through the gates of hell for in this organization.
Right.
I know so many people in mundane life who don't have anyone like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've we all have dozens, if not scores of people that we would do that for, and they would do it for us.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes people you don't even know very well. So it's interesting. So your first crown, did you ever experience any sort of problems with closing on tourneys, or have you always been good at closing on tourneys?
Yeah, I never really No, I was pretty, except for my first tourney, I won my second tourney, but it was a novice tourney. Um, but yeah, again, the SCA was a very, very different time back then. Um, and before I got knighted, I probably won or lost in the finals 2/3 of the tournaments I entered. The the first the only crown I fought in Atlantia, I was a hotshot unbelt, and I was expected to do quite well, and I went 0-2. Um, um, but no, I've never really had a problem with, once I got to the deep end part of the tournament, I usually was able to buckle down. I did have a good lesson in humility at a crown in the East. That would have been, I guess, probably 96 or 97. I was probably at the peak of my fighting career at that point. I was in as phenomenal shape as I was ever going to get. I had been training really, really hard, and I went into that tournament. Yeah, it is a fighting in this tournament is a mere formality. I mean, I was that convinced of my own prowess. I lost to one of the guys I authorized that morning, and lost to one of the regulars in our fighter practice who I love him. I love William McCrimmon to death, but at that time, William McCrimmon should not have been a challenge for me. And I lost to both of those two gentlemen, and learned a very important lesson at that point in my life. But no, for the most part, I learned the mindset that I always have in tournaments.
And what's that?
I when I step out onto a tourney field, it's mine. This is my field. This is my house. You have to take it from me. It's not, my motivation is not to intimidate my opponent, though that is a side effect of it. I'm always the first. When they call the names, my helmet is already on. I'm there. I'm in the list before my opponent is. This is my field. You have to take it away from me. And that's to get me in the right headspace. And probably 95% of the time, they can step out into the field, and I can see from their posture, I can see from their body language, they've already beaten themselves. Again, I don't do it to intimidate them. I do it to get me in the right mind space, but I can see that it has that effect. Even though it didn't work out for them. I use, to describe it to people, I use a scene from a movie. In Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, when Darth Maul is pacing, having just killed Qui-Gon Jinn, and he's pacing, waiting for Obi-Wan to come out and fight him. That's kind of the mindset that I have. I'm there, I'm anxious, I'm waiting on you. You're sitting here making me wait. I can't hit you yet because I can't get to you. But from a headspace, that's where I want to be. And yes, I still, I adore the pageantry that is crown, and I am all about saluting, all about honoring my opponent, his lady, my lady, the crowns, all of the pageantry that makes crown tournaments so special. But when they call lay on, it's business, and that's kind of my mindset.
Have you always been a sword and shield fighter? I know right now you're fighting buckler mostly, right?
Yeah, I gotten pretty good with polearm before I was knighted. It was in Atlantia. If you're a one weapon form person at the time, they would never have knighted you. My polearm was pretty darn good, but primarily sword and shield and polearm. Up until recently, I think I was 0-13 with two sword fights in tournaments. I just don't, I would have better luck throwing down the sword and fighting single sword. I don't have the coordination or the mindset for it. But it was always sword and shield was, my tourney form. For a while, I fought with a Wankel shield, but it's mostly been heater. If I had it to do all over again, I would fight with a center grip, but I've been fighting heater mostly since 1982, 83. So you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But
I was going to say, well, apparently you can, because haven't you won 2 crowns now with a buckler?
Just one.
One.
I had a lot of help. I switched to buckler because I moved out to the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. The nearest, until fairly recently, the nearest knight in Kingdom to me was about 2 hours away. And fighting heater was boring, unless, there were 2 or 3 people in the kingdom, none of whom lived nearby, that were any kind of a challenge with heater. I mean, it was just, there was no challenge to it. I don't want to denigrate any of my opponents, but it did not push me. It did not drive me. If I wanted a challenge, I would drive the 3 hours to the Nutley practice, or I would sometimes drive the 3 hours to the Storvett practice in College Park, Maryland. Because there was just nobody local who could push me with sword and shield. So I picked up the buckler, and it made it a lot more challenging. And about the time I was getting decent with buckler, completely out of the blue, Duke Dietrich moved 10 minutes away. So I go, here is somebody who is way better than I am. So, even when I picked up the heater, he was kicking my ass. But I was still in, all right, I want to get good enough with a buckler to win a crown. It wasn't the actual, it wasn't, I got to win a crown with a buckler. It was, I have to be at that level. And having Dietrich as an opponent was a huge help to that effect. I mean, he's just, I don't know if you fought him, but I mean, his hand speed is just, he kicks my ass. It's no fun.
I definitely watched him fight Sean, the first Adult Swim we went to. I don't know if I actually got to fight him, but yes, he has phenomenal hand speed. Phenomenal. I mean,
him moving to the area, unfortunately, a few weeks back, he moved to Trimaris, broke my heart. My training partner has abandoned me for warmer pastures. But he really came at a great time for me, as far as, I needed something to push me. And between the two of us, we built up quite a dynamic in the unbelts here. We didn't have the dozen or so nights that they had at that original Storvert practice I went to, but we'd built that dynamic where people were like, look, we have Timothy and Dietrich, at this out in the middle of nowhere practice, and we would have people coming 90 minutes or, 2 hours to come to our practice to work with us. And they have all made phenomenal progress because, it was, we didn't beat up on the lesser fighters, but they kind of treated it as a sink or swim mentality. They're they would say to us, look, give us your best game. And, they would push themselves, and they made immense progress. I mean, as an unbelt, if I'd had 2 fighters at that much higher caliber than I was, I would have driven the 2 hours to be there with them. I mean, that's one of the other things yeah, it's like I said, it's breaking my heart that he's now in Trimaris. But that's one of the other things that, and I hate to go back to my SCA then versus now kind of thing. At the chivalry meet, I never hold a knight candidate to be at my level of prowess. I was knighted, I think it was probably AS 20, give or take.
1990.
Yeah, so 20, 23, 22, whatever it was. No one in the world had been doing this for 35, 36, 37 years. So I'm I would say, even the old grizzled knights at the time I was done had been done maybe 8 or 10 years before. I've got, almost 40 years worth of reflexes that somebody has to overcome to get to my level. And yes, we have techniques and they have videos they can watch to learn. And the whole thing is much more structured than it was when I was coming up. But I didn't have to fight it. I didn't have to overcome those kind of obstacles. And I think we've to some extent made the bar too high from a prowess level. But that's my outlook.
Well, one of the things that really impresses me about you is that when you are pushing yourself to be the best fighter that you can be, and there's actually people fighting, which is not now, you'll drive still the 3 hours to Nutley and the 3 hour, and you'll pack people in your car and you'll go and you push yourself all the time to get better. And you've won crowns, from 92 to 2018? So you've had a very, very long window where your prowess has been super high. What do you think has been the key to that for you?
Finding something to motivate me. Again, my motivation in the early years was not one that I would look really favorably on now. But probably for the last, certainly as long as I've been in Ethelmark, my motivation is to help people out, bring them along as fighters. I kind of try and be the ringleader of fun. And for some reason that ends up with me winning crown. Adult Swim, while is one of a couple of events that we do out here that are not your usual tournament. We do another event out here called Corn Maze. Pretty straightforward what it's going to be. But I was driving to a fighter practice with one of the locals, and we're driving past an agricultural tourism place, a corn maze. And I'm like, man, it would be so much fun to have melees in that. And can you think of all the different things you could do? And he's like, I went to high school with the guy who owns the place. Let me make a phone call. And so he talked to him, and he's like, well, I shut it down for agricultural tourism the Sunday after next. And we're going to plow it in on Monday. If you want to show up at 8 p.m. on a Sunday night, you guys can fight in it. So Facebook I use Facebook as a tool. If it was not helpful with promoting things like Adult Swim or Corn Maze, I would have the hatred that exists on Facebook would have run me off years ago. But because we had Facebook as a mechanism, on a Sunday night in November, we had like 50 of us starting at 8 p.m. in a corn maze. We'd rented a bunch of the big construction light towers, and we fought till about 2:00 in the morning, and I think we've held 5 or 6 of them now.
Does he keep it open an extra weekend for you so you don't have to fight in the middle of the night anymore?
Well, yeah, we do that. Although the nighttime fighting, okay, this is caveat. This is not high medievalism.
Well, no, it's fun, right?
It's fun, but I preface this with this is not high medievalism. The highlight of the corn maze, our grand finale, if you will, after we fought all day, we have a section of the maze that we set aside for the fencers to play in, and we play in some of it. But because pretty much it comes down to what silly, fun scenario can I do to put a smile on people's face? I give everyone a glow stick, an unbroken glow stick, and it's around their neck with a string. Actually, I probably ought not to say this because the Society or Marshal might shut us down, but Everybody gets a glow stick and they can distribute themselves throughout the maze however they want. I don't care. Go, if you want to put 50 of you in a corner, I'm good with that. But at some point, I say, stop, and everybody breaks their glow sticks. And those are the teams. You have the red team, you have the blue team. In this particular corn maze, in the middle of the maze, there is this bridge that we allow pedestrians to stand on top of this bridge so they can watch these colored lights like fireflies running around the maze trying to find each other. And when you break the glow sticks, you'll see that one blue glow stick surrounded by red glow sticks, and you just know what's going to happen. But we have the resurrection point on either end of this bridge, and we fight. After a while, we just let it just breaks down into just this chaos around the bridge. It's just everybody's laughing and giggling. And we keep trying to make it a little more silly each year. A couple years ago, I think it was about the time Zombieland came out. I explained this rule to the other people, and I don't know if you've ever met Sir Tosh of Atlantia. Great guy.
No.
But I went to Sir Tosh, and Tosh, you are patient 0. When you die, pull off your glow. Oh, and that's the other thing. For the glow stick part of the maze, there are no lights. We turn off the lights. It is pitch black. Everybody has glow sticks. So, Tosh, when you die, pull your glow stick. You are now a zombie. And I want you to work around the fringes, and I want you to build up a little zombie army. When you kill somebody, they're a zombie. And so those of us who are watching or marshaling, we can see, the zombie army starting to form, but the red side and the blue side are so focused on killing each other that, they don't notice the zombies forming. And we eventually call humanity's last stand, and we have the red and the blue side fight together against the zombie horde under the bridge. And you hear, 100, you're out there freezing your tail off because it's November in central Pennsylvania.
Great.
But you hear 100 or so fighters hollering out, brains, like I said, not high medievalism, but everybody has a smile on their face.
But there's room in the SCA for fun like that. It doesn't always have to be high medievalism.
Well, that one is certainly not.
I love that. I love that. What would you call yourself? The what of fun?
Ringleader of fun.
Ringleader of fun. That's awesome.
Again, I mean, it's the SCA has given me so much enjoyment for so many years, and I'm in kind of a unique position. Not unique, but I mean, having traveled around so much and lived in so many different areas, I know a lot of people, and that's how Adult Swim actually happened. I drove out to Nutley, at that time, this was before Dietrich got here, when the only time I was going to get a challenge at a fighter practice was to drive 3 hours to Nutley. And I spoke with Duke Brennan and a couple of the other guys out there, and I'm like, look, rather than me taking 20 guys out to New Jersey for a fighter practice, how about we pick a weekend and have you guys come out? And His Grace and all the other people I spoke with was like, yeah, we'd be happy to. We'll gladly help you out. And so we started setting it up. And at the time, business had the circumstances that I ended up traveling to Dallas. I was Prince at the time, and I ended up meeting Sven, who was Prince, and Brandon, who was King at the time. And, Sven was, when we were talking, he's like, yeah, I go to Gulf Wars and nobody will do pickups with me. I go to Australia Wars and nobody will do pickups for me. I'm like, hey, we're doing this thing in central Pennsylvania. He's like, okay, it's Pennsylvania. I got to fly there, but I'm there. And, the more people that I was able to draw in with connections, the more it kind of snowballed. Baron Ichi in Atlantia was very, very, he and he and Sean go way back.
Yeah.
And he's like, I think I can probably talk Sean into coming to this thing. I'm like, come on, that would be phenomenal. And, so of course, Sean got us Duke Bryan from the East, and it kept snowballing. And I'm looking at this, it's like, we've got 40 or 50 royal peers coming to this fighter practice. And I mean, once the word got out, the first Adult Swim was like 300 heavies.
Great.
I mean, and I mean, you've been there, so you obviously know that it's unique, but Facebook, as much as Facebook is a pain in the butt, and it just makes me so angry sometimes, without Facebook, something like that could never have happened.
Yeah.
And the combination of Facebook and having lived in 4 different kingdoms, to arm twist, beg, grovel, plead, pull in favors, is what made that happen.
That's so cool. I mean, I think it's one of the coolest things. And the more people you get to commit, the more people you get to come, right? Because it's like all the roller coasters are going to be in Central.
Right. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, I don't want to give any one person credit for it, but I think Sean was the tipping point. I think once we got Sean to that first one, once he got hit, well, he owes me. When the last set he and I fought an Adult Swim, I got the upper hand, and we ended just as I could see it click for him, and he was about to kick my ass. But fortunately, our set ended just then. So, but he was kind of the tipping point, because as soon as Sean said, yes, I'm coming out, people were like, Christ, he's coming out from Artemisia. I can make the trip out from Detroit, or you know what? I'll come up from South Carolina, and it's just. See, I think he really was I think he was the final straw that people said, yes, I can make it happen. I mean, and we've had, I think the most we've achieved is 18 kingdoms one year. 18 kingdoms represented at the fighter practice.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I don't know if Penzic has that.
Yeah.
I mean that the one year we had somebody, we had Australia and we had Europe at the same fighter practice. I mean, fighter practice.
Yeah. And it isn't like Penzic where you have a whole week. I mean, it really is a weekend. So it's a commitment to fly all the way there from wherever. But it's worth it. And I think, that's like one of the things that, why I think you've been so successful for so long is you do what it takes to get what you need, right? Because you're passionate about what you're doing and you're willing to expend the energy to make things happen.
It's still fun. It's easy to do that because it's still fun for me. I mean, the people in the organization are my friends. I mean, I stick around for the people. I'll have fun pretty much whatever I'm doing, but it's still fun. So it's easy for me to push myself.
We haven't really talked about your reigning yet, and we should, because you've reigned 7 times in 3 different kingdoms. What's your favorite part about reigning?
Serving the people. I make whoever is running our staff, or one of my proteges or whoever, I always make them crazy, and my wife is the same way, in that somebody, I'm running between point A and point B to do those things that the king and queen have to do, and some random person comes up and asks us a question on something, and we'll sit and have that we try and be the monarch that person wants. And I still get such great joy in being there for the other people. That's for me the single, aside from there's still nothing like putting a crown on my lady's head. But from a personal satisfaction point of view, that's still why I do it. Although I've sworn off crown tourneys. I think my wife and I do a good job. Certainly when we sit the thrones, that is what we take the job very, very seriously. We are there for the people. But and she agrees, in Ethelmark, we've done it 4 times now, and I think a span of 6 years or 7 years. I think we've hit the point where the SCA as a whole will be better served by having other people there. That was again, I wanted to be good enough to win with a buckler, but I honestly didn't think I had a chance to win with buckler. And it was kind of like, all right, I won with a buckler, so be it, we'll do it. If I enter another, barring some monumental thing, upheaval in kingdom that I think needs an experienced hand to run things, barring that, if I enter another crown, it'll be single sword, because it really is, the SCA would be better served to have more people sit the thrones rather than some old dinosaur, trying to relive his 20s. And again, I think we did a good job, and we are certainly dedicated to it. But there's so many people who would do a good job. And I gotta go back to Adult Swim. My job is to I do PR. Other people run that event. One of my proteges, Baron Leo Dietrich, has just, I'm an ideas guy. I've always, I can come up with plans. I can motivate people. I can do all that. But when it comes to the details, I always fall by the wayside. And Leo has been phenomenal about, okay, Tim, all right, you've set this thing up. Let's get the site arranged. Okay, we got to rent chairs. We'll rent the chairs. You didn't get the water coolers set up, did you? No. All right, I'll get the water coolers. I mean, Adult Swim would have fallen apart without him. And I don't want I should have brought that up while we're on the subject of Adult Swim. But.
Well, I think you've always been really good about giving credit to everybody that helps you run that and your other things. I mean, I feel like you have. So I appreciate that. I mean, that's another thing about you, is that you are very good about that. So I don't know. So between the 3 kingdoms you've been in, like what are the differences in reigning in the different kingdoms? Like how was it different for you?
Kaid, I never really fit in. That was more on me than them. I mean, again, everybody was in their 20s, but I was at the time, I grew up in Maryland and I moved out to Southern California, and it was just, these people are different. So I never really fit in. Everybody I met there was lovely people, fine people. I have lifelong friends I made back then, but I never really fit in. I didn't really fit in. I can't really qualify it. I can't really say what any one thing it was, but I'm not a West Coast guy. I moved to the East, and the East was wonderful. Again, I have people I would go through the gates of hell for, and I know they do the same for me from my time in the East. But we had, my wife and I had pretty much dropped out of the SCA in my last bunch of years in the East Kingdom. Our kids were at, the Cub Scout and ballet recital and Little League baseball game era of, phase of life.
6.
Yeah, 6. We have 6.
Yeah.
And
your focus is where it should be.
What's that?
Your focus was where it should be, on your kids and their activities.
Right. I mean, and I still feel that we've probably done too much SCA rather than, but speaking to the kids, they've said, no, Dad, we got memories from the SCA that we could have never had any other way. But that, and coupled with, at that time, the politics in the East had gotten pretty bad. And so it just wasn't any fun anymore. We'd go to an event with the kid things, we'd get to go to an event once every 5 or 6 weeks, if that. And we'd go to an event and there would be political BS going on. And it's just, I don't need this.
Right.
They have since gotten way past that. But at that time, it had gotten pretty hairy. And then we moved out to Ethelmark. And it was really the SCA I joined 30 years ago, at the time, 30 years ago. We moved to a small, what I thought was a small college group. We read in the Kingdom newsletter that they were doing a demo, and there was a line in the demo announcement, look, if you have something nice, bring it for our A&S table so we can show it off. And I knew the group was based on a college campus. So I was thinking it was going to be, your typical college group from when I joined. So, I took one of my nicer scrolls and, cleaned off the glass and put it in a box. And we have a hand blown drinking horn. Okay, polished it up, put it in the box, polished up a couple of my nicer pieces of armor, put them in the box to take to the event. So I've got this trunk full of goodies for their A&S table. And the way this demo was, I had to park probably 500 yards from it, and I couldn't see the demo site because there were buildings in the way. And so I've got my box of trinkets, and I figured this is going to be a nice introduction of, hey, you've got an out kingdom duke moving into your little teeny shire, because I hadn't met any of the people. And I round the corner and I see, 10 or 12 pavilions set up.
Wow.
And there's somebody who's blacksmithing. There's somebody else who's knitting chainmail and showing children how to do it. Somebody's carving quills. It's just the most amazing, well-rounded SCA group I'd ever seen. And I'm like, I'm going to go put my box of trinkets back in the car because they don't need these. And I go over and what can I do to help? Oh, we have another fighter. There are 2 fighters here today. This is great. So, I was able to contribute in the way I most could. It turns out my shire has, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting 3 or 4 laurels and half a dozen pelicans. They're all wonderful people and I adore them. But it's completely old school in that in this kingdom, everybody does everything. And it had gotten away from that when I was the tail end of my time in the East. Everybody's at the thrown weapons range. Everybody does archery. At the end of the feast, it's always a royal peer you see with a broom or a mop, doing their part. And it like I said, it's the SCA I had joined so many years ago. Gabrielle and I went from, one event, maybe 2 events a year, to we've now done 4 reigns in 7 years. I mean, it's just, we went full circle and we fell in love with the SCA all over again. And I don't want that to say, the East Kingdom is a wonderful place, but it just, that tail end of the time period when we were there, for us, it had lost the magic. But I mean, there are so many wonderful people there. I don't want it to seem like I'm taking away from what they have, because it was just that the timing of that era.
Yeah, I think when you have kids and you're focusing on that, when you do go to an SCA event, it needs to be an escape. It needs to be like your little mini vacation. And if it's full of politics, that's not going to feed your soul, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that makes sense to me. Did you keep fighting while?
Yeah, I had some squires, and my responsibility was to my squires, and I my squires are my men at arms I kept working with, and I would fight, once a month, maybe we'd have them over to the house for a barbecue, but nothing. I stagnated for 10 years. The prime fighting years of my life, my 30s and 30s into 40s, I pretty much didn't fight, didn't really pursue it. I mean, heck, if my knowledge of fighting now, if I had that when I was 30, whoo, I may actually be able to beat Dietrich.
So what's your favorite Ethelmark tradition?
I think rather than tradition, I'd go with some of the people.
Okay.
I mean, the first two peers that I really recall meeting in this kingdom and getting to know at any length were Mistress Alicia in my local shire and Duchess Dorinda. And that those two people, more than anything else, really brought me back. These two people embodied what can I do to lift other people up. That's what their motivation is. You know, how can I mentor this person? How can I help this person develop what they have so they can contribute to the organization? And both of them, I don't know how I know they both have occasion suffered from burnout because they've just been doing so much heavy lifting for so long. But it's people like that have made Ethelmark special for me. And I could rattle off a list of, you know, dozens of people that I hold in that same level of esteem as I hold the two of them. But those are just the two first ones I really got to know and cherish.
What do you think that the chivalry in general could do better to do that same sort of fostering and lifting people up and helping them achieve?
In Ethelmark, I mean, this is part of the thing where I was able to win crown with a buckler. I live out in the middle of nowhere. We have the biggest density of fighters in our kingdom is in the Pittsburgh area. That's where most of our deeper end fighters exist. And the dynamic in Pittsburgh has been such that I can still live out in the middle of nowhere and have minimal amounts of training partners, and I can still win crown because rather than the 8 or 10 or 12 of them who are very, very, very good fighters getting together and having one weekly practice where they push each other, you have half a dozen little teeny tiny practices, and they're all, none of them are private practices. They all welcome everybody else to come to the practice. I don't want to imply that that's not the case, but they never have that density of instruction and challenge that we had at that first big set of practices I went to in Storvik. And that's what I think we as members of the chivalry can do is things like Adult Swim, the Adult Swim in February, and then the one we do at Penzic. I always promote those with, look, these nights are here to work with you. Maybe there's not a night in your area. Maybe the local knight in your area doesn't fight their weapon form that you work with. These nights, you know, you don't have that excuse. Come out to Adult Swim. Come, you know, that's what I think we need to do. We need to make ourselves available, and we need to have groups of us to make it easier for them to approach us. Again, at Adult Swim, that's one of the things that to me is magical about it is there's no egos at that event, which is so counterintuitive when you have, you know, hell, we've had over 100 chivalry at every one of them. And I think we've had over 50 royal peers at every one of them, but there's always somebody better. There's always somebody that you don't match up against really well. So everybody checks their ego at the door. And I've never heard report one of a knight who would not help somebody who asked him for instruction. And I think that's what we need to do. We still have too many private practices. We still have too many cases of, yes, I'll only show those techniques to my squires. I'll work with anybody. If somebody wants my instruction, I don't care. I will make the time for them, even if I don't think that person has any chance of achieving great renown as a fighter. That doesn't matter to me. They want to learn. I'm willing to help them, and I'll do everything I can to, I'll help them put together armor. I will help them to do whatever. That's what I think we need more of. We all need to give back, and I think at times we all get a little I don't want to say self-centered, but we're more focused on what we're trying to accomplish for ourselves, and we're forgetting that we have a responsibility to everybody else.
I think in a lot of the bigger city areas that there's that same problem that they have in Pittsburgh. I know we have it in Seattle. Like, we have probably a practice every day of the week, and none of them are big. And if we would just consolidate even just once a month, it would be so much better for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've been to probably half a dozen of the Pittsburgh practices. Whether it's coming home from an event, hey guys, I'm driving through Pittsburgh and you got your Sunday practice. Can I, and the attendance goes from 5 people to 35 or 40. And they've since gotten better, but it's just, it boggles my mind that you have that density of really good fighters. That's how you get good.
Right.
I when I drive out to Nutley, it's kind of funny. The book on Tim at Nutley is, Tim's just going to charge right in. You backpedal and throw shots at him, and it's like, I didn't drive 3 hours to play cat and mouse at range. I can learn that. I can practice that at my own local practice. So I'm going to wade into the jaws of the tiger. Yes, I understand that I'm violating all these basic rules on how to engage your opponent, but I've got the deep end of the pool throwing insane amounts of shot at me, and I'm going to turtle up, whether it's buckler or heater. I go out there for the competition, even if in that regard I have to handicap myself, and I put on my helmet and I fight. The guys that I'm fighting, they'll fight one person, they'll sit down and catch their breath. They'll fight another person, they'll sit down and catch their breath. I drive out to Nutley, I put my helmet on and I fight. And, I can feel my abilities doing this as my endurance drops over the course of a 2 or 3 hour fighter practice. And so, towards the end of the practice, lesser fighters are even some of the unbelts are really, laying some serious stick on me. But it's like, guys, look, I haven't taken my helmet off in 2.5 hours. It's you're gonna lump up on the fat old Duke when he comes in, and I wish I could convey that drive to some of our brethren.
Right. And one of the things that you're doing is, like, at Adult Swim, you're checking your ego, right? Like, because you're going to Nutley 3 hours out of your way to learn. So you check your ego, you fight as much as you can, and people are going to lay stick on you that probably shouldn't, and that's okay.
Exactly. I mean, it's I've eaten a lot of humble pie the last couple of years with Dietrich around. I mean, yeah. I'm kind of glad that he's gone. Yeah, I'm the big fish fighter practice again. That's right. I'm in charge. The new sheriff is back in town.
That guy has such an insane work ethic.
Yeah, well, until COVID happened, pretty much every day I went to the gym with him, and he graciously, I'm a neophyte in the gym, and he is just in insane shape, and he kind of held my hand through exercises, and he took pity on me, and okay, Tim, I think I need some water. How would you like some water? And that's that's his code for Tim, you look like you're about to die.
Have some water so we don't kill you here.
Exactly, but he was very, very polite about it. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
But
So I've kept you over a bit. Did I remind you to bring your sword? I didn't, did I?
no.
That's
no.
all right. Do you do anything special to your sword? Like, do you wrap the handle, or like, do you have any little
Nope,
tricks?
nope. My sword, I do a lot of infighting techniques, of very, very unorthodox infighting techniques. I had, in my late teens and early 20s, I was a carpenter. And so, literally I would drive nails with flat snaps or even wraparounds. So, I mean, I can do a lot of in close fighting, and I've got these Popeye forearms. So my sword is rather short. I'm tip of my finger to the center of my nose looking forward. It's always that length. When I'm fighting buckler, I have a thrusting tip on it. Duke Brennan always teases me whenever I show up with the thrusting tip sword with a buckler, because I used to joke, guys who had thrusting tips, yeah, I don't need a thrusting tip. I have technique with my sword. And so of course, every time I show up with a thrusting tip, he's like, your grace, I thought you had technique. But no, that's I'll plane my swords down to 1.25 inches thick, but I like more like 1.75 inches cross section, planed to 1.25 inches. But very, very short swords. I do a lot of short stems, a lot of things that I just couldn't do with a long sword. Even with buckler, I know there's a gentleman in the West Kingdom who won a crown with a buckler some years back.
Mark.
But his sword looked like 4.5 foot long.
Well, he's a hand and a half sword fighter usually. So.
But yeah, I mean, I will still prefer even fighting buckler to infight. I will get in zero range, literally belly to belly fighting buckler. I don't consider that a handicap. In fact, it works to a great extent, because I'll bind people with it, but I have to weather the flurry of guys with long swords and long arms when I get in there to do that. Sir Thorbrand of the Outlands is kind of the bane of my existence in Adult Swim, because he's got 4 foot long arms and 4 foot long swords. And I fought him last swim with a buckler and a little teeny tiny short sword. And, even if I could block the 6 or 8 or 10 shots, eventually he's going to get one through before I'm at range. And it was, my success rate was not good.
All right, so let's do the final 10 then. Number 1, if you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
Sir Strykar, who retired probably 20 years ago. I probably, of all the people in the SCA, I hold him in the highest esteem. And I would dearly love to armor up against him one more time.
Who would you like to see reign in your kingdom?
I think probably Thorsel and Beatrix, or Beatrix and Thorsel. I think she'll win a crown before he does. I love them both to death. But I think she'll probably win a crown before he will. And this will be
really hurt him.
This will be fodder for the both of them on Facebook.
Yeah, she's tenacious. I think the world of her. Okay, if you could talk fighting with anyone in the world for an hour, who would it be?
Probably Sean.
Yeah, he's a good one. What's your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
I can't believe as a heavy fighter I'm going to say this, but the Three Musketeers from the early 70s.
Cool.
Close second of The Princess Bride.
Princess Bride is one of my faves. If you could add a rule or subtract a rule from the rules of the list, what would it be?
I'd take away face thrust. I think at some point somebody's going to get jacked too hard with a face thrust. I still don't think they're safe, especially at something like Penzic. People lose control.
What is your favorite tournament format?
Bear pits.
Bear pits.
Fighting Burka last year with a buckler, while I was not pleased with my performance of 5th place, a 3-hour bear pit where it's just nonstop chaos, glorious.
Nice. What's your favorite event?
I will set aside my two personal. I'll set aside Corn Maze and Adult Swim. Probably Ethelmark's event Harvest Raids.
If there was an event besides Adult Swim or Corn Maze that you would suggest somebody go to in Ethelmark, would that be it?
Yes.
If you could have any helmet, regardless of cost, what kind would it be?
There's the Burgundian Chapelle de Fer that is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is the most styling helm of all time.
Cool.
The swept one, you know the helmet I mean.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. It's Saturday morning at Estrella, and several people want to talk to you about last night. What did you do?
Do we have time for a brief anecdote?
Sure.
Okay, 6 kids. My kids have been going to Penzic quite literally since they were in the womb. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we happened to have a few of the local college kids camping with us, and they asked us if they could take our 17 and 18-year-old daughter and son out with them as they went out and about. We trusted their judgment. Good, they're good people. So we let them take our 2 kids out. So the next morning they said, "Dad, we didn't realize that there was this thing about Penzic. We thought Penzic was old farts sitting around the campfire talking about the good old days and going to bed at 9 o'clock. If Gabrielle and I aren't attending court at events like Penzic and Estrella Wars, 9:30, I'm out." So probably I'd be snoring. That would what I'd be talking about.
That's funny. Your kids discovered the bog or whatever.
Well, we were Prince and Princess that year. So we actually, all right, you know what? We'll give our 2 eldest the royalty treatment. So we went down to the Lost Boys pirate party as Prince and Princess with our eldest 2. One of our event staff, soon to be Sir Tiernock, he got a writ before COVID broke down, so his knighting is in limbo. But soon to be Sir Master Tiernock knows the staff pretty well, so he and I discuss a plan, and he makes it happen, and he speaks with the guy running the party, and so we walk into the Lost Boys, and my son, who's at the time had this glorious curly hair, huge. I'm watching my son walk around the camp like this as Tiernock is walking the other way, making these arrangements happen. So the Lost Boy party being what it is, we watch this young lady in a Ren Fair style garb walk up to my 17-year-old son and say, are you William? And he's, yes. And she, of course, takes the back of his head and just face plants it. And he's starting to resist before he realizes what's happening. And of course, his mother and I are laughing hysterically at my poor son, who's this color right here. I mean, he is bright red in embarrassment. So yes, they discovered Penzic is a little more than old people sitting around a campfire until they go to bed at 9:30.
I love that. That is great. All right. Who is your favorite fight ever?
I think my favorite fight of all time, I fought Duke Malcolm at a Crown in Ethelmark some years ago. It's the fight's up on YouTube. It's absolutely wonderful. I mean, we both wanted that fight so badly, but neither one of us, he hit me with a shot and I'm like, was that high enough? Was that above the face or was that in the face? And he's like, no. You can't take that. If there's any doubt, don't take it. And the whole fight is like that, but we're doing the whole Princess Bride running dialogue during the fight. I see you're using Vicini's defense against me. I mean, we keep that up for about 10 minutes in a Crown Tournament semifinals. Wow. And the crowd is in stitches. And, you can tell from the patter, the experienced fighters can tell, even though we're yucking it up, we are laser focused on this fight. And the crowd has no clue of the tension that exists between the two of us because we're so focused, because we're being silly at the same time. And that's easily my favorite fight of all time. In fact, when this is up, I'll try and find the link and put it in the comments because it's what a tournament fight ought to be. Malcolm is as honorable opponent as you will ever meet in your entire life. And that is without doubt my favorite fight.
Cool. Yeah, I got to fight him at the last Adult Swim I was at. It was, and I think he went out to Sean's that year too. He said,
yes, he and Tiernock too, for that matter. Yeah. Tiernock was his squire, or I guess still is.
All right. The bonus question is the cleanest fighter in your kingdom. Who's the cleanest?
Cleanest. Lord Guillaume. One of our baronies is the barony of St. Swithinbog, and in addition to being a phenomenally clean fighter, Guillaume is probably, even though he is not a knight, he is probably the best representative of the ideals of chivalry I've ever met in the society. I adore the man, and we made him our jewel, which is our kingdom's premier non-peerage award. I aspire to be as good a representative of the tenets of chivalry as that man is.
Very cool. I love that answer. That's great. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview with me. I've had a lot of fun learning some about you and having your wife quip in. That was cool.
She's the brains of the outfit. I'm the sense of humor. She's the brains.
Good thing you went to Estrella that year.
Well, indeed. Well, this will be the 30th anniversary of meeting my wife at Estrella. Oh, wow. So if they hold it, we are definitely going to be attending, even though it's cool. Essentially back to back with Adult Swim.
Yeah, it is. That's tough now that they're back to back. But anyway. Yeah,
no. If Adult Swim and Estrella happens, we'll be there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I just really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Been my absolute pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.